Welcome to the Lift Every Voice podcast, where we explore books by contemplative writers of color. I'm Christine Valters Paintner.
And I'm Claudia Love Mair. We are joined each month by the author of our book club selection. Together, we explore how increasing our diversity of perspectives on contemplative practice can enrich our experience of the Christian mystical tradition.
We encourage you to join us by reading the book, listening to the conversations, and engaging with the reflection questions on our website at abbeyofthearts.com. Welcome, everyone, to the Lift Every Voice Book Club podcast. And we are delighted to be back this month with Kaitlin Curtice. She's joining us for the second time. The first time around, we had her do her talk about her beautiful book, Native. And this month, it's this really beautiful, powerful book, Living Resistance. Both were powerful. And I'm joined, as usual, by Claudia Love Mair, my wonderful ongoing conversation partner. So Kaitlin is an award-winning author, poet, storyteller, public speaker, and an enrolled citizen of the Potawatomi Nation. She writes about the intersection of spirituality and identity and how that shifts throughout our lives. She also speaks on these topics to diverse audiences who are interested in truth-telling and healing. We, as I said previously, featured her book Native, and this month we're really excited to be focusing on living resistance. So welcome, Kaitlin. It's wonderful to have you back again.
Thank you. I'm so happy to be here.
Well, in your introduction, you write, "The timeline of your life is not a straight line after all. It is a series of ebbs and flows, backs and forths, heres and theres. You are nowhere and everywhere all at once." And that means that most of the time, the best we can do is be present to the moment, be open to the unlearning and the learning, and trust that you're doing the work of love. As you read this book, you may get overwhelmed. When you do, come back to this page and read these words again. Repeat them to yourself as a kind of medicine. I am a human being. I am always arriving. Why did you find it necessary to write that into this book?
There were a few things behind that entire section. I'm glad you asked. You know, the first thing with so much of my work is to try to help us get out of the linear mindset that we have been taught and indoctrinated with, this idea that healing, that our own life's timeline, that it's all linear, when instead it's these cycles and these moments. I mean, that's why I created this, this beautiful, on the cover is my realms, and they're circles. We're always moving in cycles, seasons. And so I wanted to get us out of that in my writing. And then I wanted us to, in the midst of that, take off some of the pressure that we put on ourselves and that we put on each other. There is real pressure to change oppression and hate and all of the things in the world that are hurting us and hurting others. Like, that's all very real. But at the same time, we cannot move toward healing if the pressure is so big and heavy that we're unable to move and really lean in. And so I wanted to insert this medicine. And I want to say this. I had the word mantra and then learned from some of my friends that can be an inappropriate use of the word. So I took it out and put medicine instead, which fits who I am as an Indigenous woman. And I just want to share that as a way of showing that I learned something as I was writing the book from my beautiful friends on Instagram. So yoga teachers and people who shared about that. And so anyway, I just wanted to note that, because we are always arriving. So this whole idea of I am a human being, I'm always arriving. I hope that medicine, that those words just help us to calm down a little and to take a breath and to realize that we are human. And if we push all the time in our resistance, if we're pushing so hard, we're going to miss something. We're going to burn out. We're going to lose ourselves in the process. And what the world needs is for all of us to love ourselves and each other and Mother Earth better, and do that as human beings and be honest along the way. And so the introduction of the book was so meaningful for me to write, prepare us for the journey. And I hope that I did that well for the reader to just lean in slowly and be ready.
Yeah, it's so gentle and beautiful. And you're right, there is this pressure. And, we've come from traditions that are full of guilt and shame and fear. And, that pressure, am I doing this right? Am I being good? It just is always kind of churning in the back of my head. So I really appreciate that you did that. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. There is a gentleness to it. And I think about one of the things that draws me to contemplative practice is that sense that we're always beginning again, and we should never think that we've arrived, whatever that might mean, at any point in our lives. So yeah, it gives us a little bit of leeway. And I think too, to that sense that it's also in the way that we act, like the impulse behind it that is part of the gift, so that if we're not doing it from a pushing place, if we're doing it from a place of like arising out of the generosity of our hearts, as opposed to the pushing. Well, you organized your book around these four, what you call the realms of resistance. And then you have this beautiful cover image to help illuminate that: personal, communal, ancestral, and integral. So tell us more about how you discerned these areas and what resistance means for you. What are we resisting and what do we embrace?
Yeah. So I was so excited when this sort of framework vision came to me, and it's loosely based on, if anyone is familiar with the medicine wheel, which is sort of an indigenous tool that a lot of tribes use. My tribe certainly does. That is this idea of just exploring the cycles of life, the cycles of the earth, the four directions. And I wanted to create something that showed how these different seasons and cycles in our own lives, each of our lives, they overlap, and we live in all of them at once. We also move through them, almost like a labyrinth, but still cyclical, and so I created these realms. And then Alana Jewel of Morningstar Designs did the cover, and it is like more than I could ever imagine. It is just so gorgeous. Yes, I know I'm biased, but my book is very beautiful because of her, and I love it so much. So resistance, this term, which of course it's one of these hot terms, right? Like decolonization and when activism, when these terms become exciting and they recycle again and again, it's like every few generations, I think we have these terms that pop up like they're brand new, but they're not brand new. And we want to reinvent them, reimagine them, which is a beautiful thing. But I also fear that we lose their meaning, their depth, right? And so I took a chance and decided to use the word resistance in this book, and wanted to, again, like stretch it and look at it from different angles, and thought, what if resistance isn't just like the raised fist, which is absolutely resistance, but what if it's also this kind of image of a gentleness and a fierceness that we can embody? And, the way I frame it is that we're resisting the status quo. We're resisting whatever that may be in our society today and throughout history, really. So, for me, it's colonization. We're resisting that every single day. White supremacy, racism, ableism, hate, whatever it is, we're working toward these systems, resisting them in hopes that we can build a better world. We're doing that every day, whether we realize it or not. And so these realms, we have the personal, the communal, the ancestral, and the integral. And it just helped me, and I think and hope that it helped the reader to just sort of break life up into these different aspects, but in a cyclical way. And so the personal realm is our own work to do, that embodiment, self-love. And then the communal work, of course, is about community, solidarity, caring for the land. The ancestral realm is a tricky one for a lot of people, and I had to write about it for my own ancestors, for a lot of people who are struggling with how to do this work, but also that we live in this in-between of those who came before us and future generations. So how do we live in this ambiguous in-between space and live our lives well? And then this middle area is like the fire within us that's the center of all that we are, and where I explore like dreaming and prayer, however that looks for anybody, and how we move forward, and that reminder that this is lifelong work, because again, I don't want us to burn out, that this is meant our whole lives. We're going to be doing all of this our whole lives, and that is okay. And that's how it should be. And so showing up to that and working through these cycles and visions. So that's the realms. Yeah.
Mhm. Thank you for that. It's a very holistic image, and yeah, I appreciated being invited into those spaces. So thank you for that.
Is that a postcard?
It is. It's these little cards, and then it shares them, each of the realms on the back. My wonderful publisher made these for my speaking events or workshops, so that, because I don't use PowerPoints. So when I go, I can hand them something, tangible to hold and look at. Right.
I need that on my wall.
Yes, it's beautiful. I'll send you one.
All right. Thanks. Okay, on page 29, you read about how the process of deconstruction gives you an opportunity to critique what your story means to you. How do our personal stories relate to our deconstruction and our decolonization?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think they're everything. The interesting thing about decolonizing, deconstructing is it's a lot like resistance, actually. We're all trying to get to kind of the same space, healing. Maybe that's the one word that encompasses all of it. We're all trying to get to some spot of healing, of care with each other, with ourselves, with all of it. But then all of these things that we go through, the deconstructing our, what we grew up with, decolonizing, thinking about how we're affected by systems of colonization, which all of us are, and what is our role. And so these things are looking at our specific story, who are we individually, what have we been through, but then looking at how our story fits into the narrative of our collective story, and then asking those really deep, hard questions. I think one thing that comes up, at least for a lot of Americans, is even I grew up with this sort of patriotic, loving vision of America. I mean, I did too, I thought Columbus was this brave explorer who had these awesome ships. And, I grew up with those narratives, and I had to deconstruct those as an adult or later in life. And that was hard. And then there's grief. There's a lot of grief to think through for a lot of us, that, oh my God, America isn't what I was grown up being taught, even as an Indigenous person. So what does that mean now? And then it leads us through a lot of difficult unravelings, a lot of unlearning. And that can be really hard. And it's going to look different for all of us, but we're still getting to that goal of healing, of care, of solidarity at the end of the day, at the end of our life. And I think that it's a beautiful thing. And I think my journey has certainly been sort of both of those things at different aspects of life. I hope that makes sense.
Yeah. And one of my beefs with Christianity, evangelical Christianity, as we received it, is the lack of honoring ancestors. In certain traditions, we honor the saints, which those are ancestors.
I know, yes.
Our ancestors, as a Native woman, me as African American, ancestors are an integral part of our culture. So they're also a part of our story. And I think to have them integrated into our, process as we decolonize and as we deconstruct, I think it's so important. Right. Thanks, Kaitlin.
Yeah, that is that was probably my favorite section, because I have a love of honoring our ancestors, which is a practice I only came to as an adult through Jungian work, primarily at the start. And anyway, I feel like we've been so taught that we're alone in this world. And yet, there's so many layers of connection, the nature itself, and of course our human community, but then also these spirit presences. And you just talked about healing, care, and solidarity. I wrote down those 3 words because they kind of shimmered for me. And I think one of the things that I was just most touched by in the book was this rootedness and relationship that the whole book is about, and this return to healing, care, and solidarity with one another, with those who are most vulnerable. So, and you write about gratitude as a spiritual reorientation to a living connectedness, which I really loved, because that practice of gratitude is such a expansive and heart-opening practice. And the way you described it, I found really beautiful. So can you tell us more about how this practice of gratitude helps us to cultivate this sense of relationship and connection with one another?
Yeah. You know, I really enjoyed writing this book.
Kitty.
I really enjoyed writing this book because I bought so many books to write it. I mean, so it felt like, even though I was writing it on my own, I just felt this, I felt that presence of solidarity through all of it, and so much gratitude and generosity with these people whose just wells I was drawing from in order to write about them in my book. And so this book itself, I hoped and I prayed that it would feel communal as I wrote it for others, because it felt that like that to me. I read from you know, just people from all over the world, people of different religious backgrounds, different racial backgrounds, different cultural backgrounds, because I wanted us to expand our ideas of care, of indigeneity, even to think of worldwide indigeneity, how it shows up across history, and holding gratitude at the center of that is everything. Because people often ask me, like, you know, what brings you hope right now? And it's the same thing that always has, which is the power of stories, which is the power of interfaith conversations, intercultural, interspiritual conversations, where we are connecting to each other because, and even though our stories and our experiences are so different, we cannot deny that we are related to one another, that we hold each other. We cannot get away from it, no matter how much we want to try. That's the terror of the world and the beauty of the world. And I think I wanted to, and I will always probably be exploring that in my writing, is how can we continue to feel that and experience that with each other?
Yeah, I think that this, yeah. I oftentimes when people ask me, like, if I had a central theme of writing, it would be holding the tension between those things, the terror and the beauty, and and creativity and creative process, and gratitude helps to navigate that. So thank you for that.
Yes.
Yeah.
In your chapter, Art as Resistance, you quote Sidney Stevenson as saying, using art as a nonviolent form of protest can carry immense meaning and strength, connecting people through their resistance. The Abbey of the Arts community of dancing monks is full of all kinds of creatives. Could you speak to us a bit about using our art, whatever that form is, as activism? That seems really doable. Something I can dive right into.
Yes. And I think we underestimate it. You know, we underestimate the power of art sometimes in all its forms, right? I really wanted to have a chapter on art as resistance, because we need to explore, like, I wanted to explain why I didn't put a raised fist on my cover, but also talk about the depth of that symbol alone as an act of resistance. And I wanted to explore how art, I mean, I have a piano at home and I've always loved music, and I play guitar and I play piano just for fun, but art tethers me to myself and to my work. It does. And whether I share that particular kind of art form with others or not, and my writing is my art. And I noticed, you know, when COVID happened, this beautiful uprising of artists showed up. I mean, authors, painters, musicians. It was just beautiful. Filmmakers, they were showing up. Some of us were exhausted. Some of us were like, had this renewed passion to create. And it was beautiful to see that difference. For the ones who were exhausted, the ones who were ready to create showed up. And it was this beautiful, like, way of sort of feeding each other that I noticed. And even on Instagram, you know, we're all in our living rooms, but we're watching these people come onto Instagram Live, and it fed me. I mean, it fed me through the beginnings of COVID and launching my book Native throughout COVID. It was beautiful, and it was resistance, and it was activism. And I think we really can underestimate the power of our art in however it shows up, and underestimate that art can feed us individually and can feed our communities and can feed our society. So it's all connected. And I hope that we continue to see that, you know. I wish that this had come out when I was writing my book, but I'm a rock climber, so my family climbs. And there was this beautiful video that was released this last year on like a film showing every year that happens called Real Rocks. And one of the films was on Palestinian resistance through climbing. And so it's the stories of Palestinian climbers and their act of resistance through climbing. And that too is art. It's movement, it's our bodies, but having this film, this artistic expression of resistance and activism, oh my gosh, it was so beautiful. And it was one of those stories that I wish I had learned about 6 months before so I could put it in the book, because it fits, you know, it fits this work. And I find those stories all the time, these artists who are creating in the world because they have to, they need it. And also because we know that it feeds each other. And I think that will always be true in the world, because we have to express this somehow, right?
Absolutely. We also saw 2020 with during the uprising around Black Lives Matter, tremendous amount of art of Breonna Taylor and George Floyd. And it's powerful, very
Yes.
powerful. We did something at my job at the Carnegie Center, big old thing for Breonna Taylor, and it was in the building for a year, and now it's out in the public. And we just commissioned a bookshelf that's carved in wood and beautiful, just to commemorate that once the building where we are in was, there was a colored reading room because Black people could not go throughout the building. I'll send you pictures of those things, but
Yeah.
it makes a statement. And, you know, I don't know, I'm talking about how I don't know how to start with activism, and like my job is literally resisting to white supremacist systems. So yeah, I really love art that wakes us up, that makes us think. Thank you.
Yeah, beautiful. You have a chapter on self-love, and I really loved that you had a whole discussion on boundaries, because I know when I'm teaching about boundaries, and particularly that like archetype of the warrior, and people always kind of sit up, and it's almost like people are hungry to know a little bit like, oh, I can create boundaries and still be this, you know, vessel of love and care. So can you tell us a little bit more about boundaries and how it helps with this practice of self-love and resistance?
Yes. You know, I started my career as a writer and a public speaker. You know, there was no sort of playbook to tell me what I was supposed to be doing. And I'm a people pleaser. You know, I was conditioned to avoid conflict and give people anything they wanted, no matter what. And so to keep things happy. And so I had to learn that sort of the hard way of, you know, I'm at this speaking event, I'm completely exhausted, but I feel like I can't say no. Or I'm, you know, writing this piece or sending out this email, and I feel like I have to appear a certain way. You know, it's so exhausting. And so, you know, through years of therapy for me and this beautiful journey of healing, I've had to learn what boundaries mean, and I'm still not good at them. I'm not. It's not like I've figured it out. But we have to talk about it and practice it with each other. And so, but I've learned a lot over the last few years in my, you know, personal world, but also in my work world. And then I work from home, so trying to divide my personal and my work world, which is very difficult, as I'm sure both of you know. So it's yeah, it's a constant learning process, but it is part of our work of self-love always. And there's so many incredible, I'm looking at all my books. There's oh boy, I just moved, so none of my books are where they're supposed to be. Shoot. Anyway, there's a new book. I'm not even going to try. I think it's Nidra Tawab, I believe is her name. Anyway, she writes on boundaries and family and so many things, but she is incredible on Instagram and off. She gives so many resources, and I've learned a lot from her and others who practice this as well, other authors and speakers who help me know how to love myself better and model that.
Yeah, I really appreciate that conversation as someone with chronic illness, and Claudia Love and I shared that experience, and how, I mean, I've had it that my whole adult life, and how that's had to teach me over and over again all the times I've had to say no. And sometimes it's been super hard, and sometimes I haven't said no to my own detriment. And yet, I think it was Richard Rohr has a powerful teaching around the sacred yes and the sacred no, which I really love. Yeah. And that idea that our sacred yes really only has meaning if we're actually saying no to other things.
Yeah.
Because if we're just saying yes to everything, then it's not really, there isn't like that quality of sacredness and our own unique call to it if we're just saying yes to whatever people ask of us. So.
And that's true for our activism and resistance too, because we're taught through social media, through being however it happens, we're taught that we should take on every thing that's happening in the world, that we should personally take it on and try to fix it. That actually doesn't help. Like, we need to find the things that are us. I know I'm a writer. I know I can use words, like find the thing that is us and say yes to that. Don't say yes to all the things and hope that that's how we make mistakes. That's how we can sometimes make things worse, because we feel like we have to do all the things and be a part of all the movements and do it now. And that can sometimes make things worse, when we should give those gifts to other people, let them handle it, and step into the things we know we can step into, in the moment.
Yeah. Beautiful.
I know, I saw a creator on Instagram talking about when things happen, like a police shooting of an unarmed Black person, and the trauma that we feel. We don't have to post about it.
Yes.
We can give ourselves that out, so we can breathe, we can process. And I really, I don't think I've heard anybody say that, because the expectation is, well, hey, you're a Black person, you're always talking about social issues.
Yep.
For one, there are so many.
Right.
And I mean, like, I'll see one 3 months later, and I didn't even hear about this one. Yeah. But there are just times I just can't do it. Yeah. I can't do it. So definitely those sacred no's are important. Absolutely. Okay, it's my turn, isn't it? Chapter 7 is all about ethical practices. What I see are people searching for spirituality, anywhere that they can find it. And they often, look toward traditions and practices that have frankly been appropriated by the dominant culture. And that's because those are accessible. Right. The yoga studio is accessible, they're in all the major cities. So what guidelines can you give us to ensure that we appreciate rather than appropriate, and that we're ethical in our spiritual practices, especially if the practice is drawn from a culture that's not our own?
Exactly. Yeah. And this, oh my gosh, I get asked this, that question of appreciation versus appropriation all the time. And it's always hard for me to answer it, because it is not like, there are things we know are appropriation and we know our appreciation. There are things we know the difference, but so much of all of this is difficult gray space. And then so much of it, people have different opinions. So my particular opinion as a Potawatomi woman, another Native person may be like, no, I don't agree with that. This is appropriation. It's really hard. I knew that I needed to write on yoga, because I have so many teachers that I follow, especially on Instagram, who are teaching about yoga practice. Susanna Barkataki has this book called Embrace Yoga's Roots. And she's just teaching us about how yoga, this particular thing, yoga, has been appropriated by American culture to become skinny white women in really expensive yoga pants and a really expensive yoga mat at a really expensive yoga studio where everyone looks the same and no one knows what yoga is. And that is where you take something beautiful and rich and deep, a spiritual practice, a practice of wholeness and care, and you turn it into a product to be sold. That's appropriation. And I write in the book about how I visited a class once, and it was the last yoga class I ever went to, because I was like, I can't do this. It was like native flute music and yoga with no explanation of anything. And I was like, I don't know what's happening, but I have to go. Like, I can't do this. I felt so disembodied and disconnected when others around me seemed to be really enjoying it. And I was just like, what's going on? And that was years ago. Now I understand what was going on. I was feeling it in my own body, but didn't have words yet. And people write on this topic who have studied it and know way more than I do. But the way that I describe it is that even with other cultures and beautiful spiritual practices, I don't think we should ignore each other's or say, I can't look at that because I'm not allowed to learn from it. I don't think that that's what it is. I think that when we are just nitpicking from a bunch, but we don't understand the power and beauty of the depth of it, we're not holding that care for it. Or if we're taking it and profiting off of it, that becomes a problem, right? So for people to take Indigenous spiritual practices, Celtic spiritual practices, Indigenous African practices, and they're taking them and Americanizing them or whitening them and making them something else, that gets lost, and you lose the beauty of the depth of that culture. Mirabai Starr, who's a friend of mine, a beautiful teacher, Jewish scholar, she studies interspiritual relationship, and she writes on this beautifully. If anyone wants to look into it further, she's just so much more articulate about it, but talks about the beauty of honoring other cultures and spiritual practices. I don't think there's anything wrong with recognizing beauty in the world. Like we should all share the depths of our spiritual practices with one another, but also acknowledge that they are to be protected in some ways. There are certain things that maybe we can't grab a hold of for ourselves, and we honor that, right? I hope that makes sense. This is such a difficult topic.
Oh yeah. Yeah. I love the Day of the Dead. And, I had the merch. I had like a big old Day of the Dead cup and some Sugar Skull leggings. And then, when I began to learn more about appropriation, I was like, oh, this is something sacred, in Mexican culture. I can't wear sugar skulls on my leggings, and then, when I saw sugar skulls for Halloween at Dollar Tree, and it's not just asking, well, you ask who is profiting from this, is Dollar Tree, donating,
Right.
to raising awareness of what's happening at the border?
Right.
No. So these are like really small ways that we can resist.
Yes.
Yeah.
And we can learn it. It's okay. It's okay to realize it, like as an adult, as an elder, it's okay. Like you realize it and you say, oops, okay, that was wrong. Let's fix it. Let's figure out the language about why, and then share it with other people. And that's how we learn. Like, it's okay. But people are so scared. People are so scared to do it wrong.
And my daughter, Abby, knew that I love Sugar Skull. So like when I stopped by and said, like, Mom, I asked my friend Lisette, can you do it? And she said, yes. So I was like, Abby, you can't ask your one Mexican friend.
But it makes sense that's her logic,
Right. Nice try, but I appreciate Lisette's yes, but I probably just need to stay away from that. I still appreciate Sugar Skulls.
Yes. It's hard.
Well, I feel like this kind of connects us back to the idea of ancestors, which we touched on at the beginning when you were talking about the realms of resistance, but I really loved that particular section of the book. And I wonder if you can talk a little bit more about how acknowledging the gifts and limitations of our ancestors helps to bring healing to the world. How is this an act of resistance?
Yeah. this was another really difficult thing to write about, because I know that I have readers who have ancestors on all different sides of everything. And the point that I just am trying to get to is that our life isn't just for us, that like we talked about this earlier, like the healing we do today actually affects our ancestors and future generations. So if we can just imagine that this liminal space that we get to live and exist in, the healing I do today, I hope helps heal my ancestors, all of them, because I have ancestors from all over. I have Potawatomi ancestors. I have European ancestors. I hope that the work I do today on decolonization, on resistance, I hope that that work helps heal them somehow in a way I don't understand. And I think that when we enter into that, no matter who we are, again, resistance is going to look different for all of us, for each of us, but we are still reaching for that goal of solidarity and care and ending oppression, right? Resisting the status quo. But depending on where ancestors are from and who we are, that's going to look different for each of us. But that healing work isn't just for us. And I hope that helps people get out of the like individualism idea a little bit too, that our healing is still collective, even for our ancestors, and that it's a part of the cycle of history as well, and acknowledging it, and acknowledging some of our ancestors were people who lived in their time and were trying to resist or not resist the status quo of what they lived through. And did they recognize as they were going through it what they should or should not have been doing? Are we recognizing in this moment what we should or shouldn't be doing in the face of the toxic status quo of our time? That's really scary to think about. It's like, what if we miss it? Like, what if we're missing everything and we're not resisting when we should? Or that can be really scary. And so again, to just like pause and kind of look around us and pay attention to where oppression is happening. And then we can't change what our ancestors did or didn't do or what happened to them. But our healing does matter. It matters on an ancestral realm that we can't understand sometimes, but is truly beautiful and important.
Yeah, it's a really powerful way of thinking about kind of the ripples of our actions, but extending not just outward in this moment, but backward through time, and also forward to our descendants, whether or not we have children or not, but for the future world. Yeah, it's a beautiful thought that whatever the actions that we do, we may not see the immediate effects. I think that's also can be empowering to know we won't always impact the immediate present world, but there may be other layers that we don't even see. Yeah,
Exactly.
You write about the loneliness of being a faith leader, an Indigenous woman. And I imagine a lot of the work you've been doing has been in white spaces. And, you're doing this work while you're trying to navigate your own identity, on these podcasts and doing these speaking engagements. Tell us about the anxiety that you felt and the kind of colonization that you're experiencing in these very well-meaning spaces. And how did you begin to finally set boundaries?
Mm-hmm.
And what did that look like? Oh, that was a lot of questions.
They're good
That's
ones.
a lot in one.
Most people, I appreciate you, because most people don't want to talk about this because it's awkward, because they are the people bringing people out to speak, or they are doing podcasts that are not sensitive to a lot of things, and you are, and I know that. And so this is hard though, because for the first few years of especially speaking and traveling, I thought I was overreacting to these different things that are being said to me. Like, I thought it was like, it's in my head, or I'm being too sensitive, or they didn't mean it that way, so I should let it go, right? Until I had like other Indigenous women or other Black women or other women of color being like, oh, that happens to me too. And no, you're not being too sensitive. This is a problem. This is colonization. This is, I was like, oh my God. So finally, I know that I'm not alone, and that I'm not being too sensitive or too much. But this is kind of like basic human dignity of being an Indigenous woman and navigating all of this. And yes, the majority of the spaces I speak in are like progressive white spaces, which have their own issues because they think they've already gotten it right. And they're still using me as a check mark. And I know that. And so I've set a lot of boundaries in the last few years, even for my own personal care. Like when the event's over, I go back to my room and have some time alone, or these are the kinds of hotels I'm comfortable staying at, or I don't do Q&As anymore at live events because I have been attacked enough times and triggered, and it's well-meaning people. But is it worth that exhaustion I feel in my body when they're not carrying anything away from it? They're just wanting to ask a question, but kind of speaking to an audience and then having this, they have about 5 minutes to process all of the things that I'm living, and then they get to throw these questions at me. That feels colonial to me. And not everyone's like that. Some people love Q&As, but for me personally, I had enough experiences, especially at white progressive churches, where I was really hurt and harmed, that I set a boundary. And so that was new for this year. And I cannot tell you how much it's helped me. And asking for questions ahead of time on some podcasts, like that all helps me because I'm not getting questions that are just re-triggering, because a lot of people just want to talk through your trauma and let it be a popular thing on a podcast, or they want to, they want to hear that stuff, but they don't want to dive into the other things that are part of healing and resistance. And so knowing I'm not alone, and then setting those boundaries, and now helping other, Indigenous women, Black women, women of color also navigate that, to know they're not alone, has been a really important part of my work, is kind of that community care, that we're all going through a lot of these things. A lot of these spaces aren't safe for us. And how do we navigate that? And I want to be open about it in public with it, because we need to talk about it more, to just do a podcast and just interview whoever you want and not think about the trauma and the triggers of your questions or the way you show up to those spaces, honoring those people and their stories, I think is important. And the same with speaking events, even if it is just a keynote, like we're still people and humans who need care, So yeah, I want to be more vocal about that. I think it's important.
Yeah. And it's not just being a person of color, being a woman as well. That the the audacity
Yes.
of the, either the questions or the advice that you get.
Yes.
Really astonishing. Thank you.
Yes, thank you for that. I wanted to make sure we get a little time to talk, because I know we only have a few minutes left, but I want to talk about liminality, because I know it's a word that you love, and I have a great love of thresholds and liminality, and particularly here in Ireland, where they're such an integral part of the spiritual imagination, embodied in places and seasons and experiences. So tell us a little bit about what liminality is. You say it's as part of the alchemy that makes us human, which is a beautiful image. So tell us a little bit more about liminality and how it contributes to our resistance.
Yeah, I mean, I love this word so much that my Substack is called the Liminality Journal. And it's because so many of us embody liminal spaces, or we are, we're moving across thresholds all the time, whether it's identity related, for people who are mixed culture, mixed race, mixed ethnicity. It's literally like a form of identity and living in the world. Whether we are just someone who asks a lot of questions, that forces you into a lot of spaces where you don't know what to believe. And that's actually not it's not a bad thing. It's actually a beautifully powerful space to exist in. And I wanted to point to that and point out people I've learned from who sort of inhabit liminal space and teach me that. And then, like I said, we literally live in liminal space between our ancestors and future generations, the future of the world. Our whole life is a big liminal space, and that's beautiful. I mean, I think that there's so much power in that, because we get to decide what our liminal space will be made of and the alchemy of it. And yeah, I just really love that because I grew up in a, conservative evangelical Christian environment where there were answers to everything, or it was just, this is what God says, so do it, or believe it, this is what God says, which was really my male pastors telling me, this is what God says. And so even though I had these questions in me or these doubts or these, what, like, what do you mean? I couldn't access it very well because I wasn't given the space to. And so as an adult, creating that space has been really powerful for me and for many people I know who are unlearning and trying to find themselves and find their way home. I mean, queer people, it's Pride, like we're talking, it's Pride Month here, and our queer relatives, that they live in that liminal space so much because of the way society has put them in that space. So it's like a forced space, but also this beautiful thing that we have so much to learn from our queer relatives. And I think that that's so important in our resistance work as well.
Yeah, I love that. And for me, it ties back to what you said at the opening, because it's this resistance to certainty and, that sort of very, I think of it as very patriarchal male sort of model of like knowing the answer and acknowledging that we are always becoming and always arriving. So yeah, beautiful. Thank you for that. I think we have time for one more question. Claudia Love, do you want to bring it on home?
Yeah. You quote Adrienne Marie Brown in your chapter on decolonization, saying, our radical imagination is a tool for decolonization, for reclaiming our right to shape our lived reality. And what is our radical imagination and how does it assist in these growth processes?
Mm-hmm. I think when I wrote a book on resistance, I knew that many of us view resistance as just this pushing against, because that makes sense. Like that is what it is. We're pushing against something. But when you do push against that status quo, you're also choosing something on the other side. And I think for me and what I see in my community and in so many people is we're pushing so hard because that radical imagination is dreaming of a beautiful, loving, connected, whole care on the other side of that, where we love each other so well. And we are so connected with Earth, our mother, and we are like restored in relationship to her and to all the creatures around us. And we hear each other's stories and we hold them with such care and healing. And I just can't let go of that dream and that vision. Oh my gosh. It makes me emotional because I know it's possible. And I know because every day I see slivers of it, in the people who are doing this work or in my own children or even in my dogs. Like, it's just the beauty of like growing a garden in my yard. Like, it can be so simple. The radical imagination can be so simple, but also so radical. It can be so huge, but so like every day as well. And I'm just inspired by that all the time, talking to both of you. Like, all of these conversations and embodiments that we practice, they add up to something. Yeah. And that something is that dream of decolonization, that radical imagination that we are constantly choosing a better world. And we may not see the fruits of it in our lifetime, but we're choosing it anyway. And that's such a gift and such an honor. And yeah. Yep. So there's that. I cried.
I'm crying a little bit too. That's a beautiful way to wrap. Thank you so much for all that you're doing. You are so inspiring. We love you. We'll see you at the next book.
Yes, be here.
Yeah, thank you, Kaitlin. Living Resistance. It's a really marvelous book. You too can help consciously choose to create a better world moment by moment. So thank you, Kaitlin. And we're so grateful to you.
Thank you.